In May of 1940, the world just watched in shock as France, one of the world's great military powers, was just crushed by Nazi Germany in only 6 weeks. Now, the story you've probably heard is that it was a nation that just gave up. But today, we're going to dig into the numbers, and you'll see they tell a much more complicated and, frankly, a much bloodier story.
And here it is, from an eyewitness. This is what American journalist William Shirer wrote from Berlin, just days after it was all over. He'd toured the battlefields and saw, well, not much. Untouched fields, roads that were fine. And his conclusion? France just didn't fight. For decades, that's pretty much been the story everyone accepted.
So, to really get why Shirer and so many others came to that conclusion, we have to look away from the battlefield for a minute. We have to look at the deep ideological chaos that was absolutely tearing the French Third Republic apart from the inside out. You know, sometimes the best way to understand this kind of widespread turmoil is to just look at a single person's life. And there's no better case study than the political journey of one man, Jacques Doriot. I mean, this guy started out as a true believer. He's the son of a blacksmith who rises up to become a genuine star in the French Communist Party. He meets Lenin himself, gets a seat on the Politburo, and even gets elected mayor of a big Paris suburb. He was, for all intents and purposes, the future of the French left.
But then, as the shadow of fascism started to creep across Europe, Doriot's journey took a radical and, frankly, a shocking turn. He would end up embracing the very ideology he had spent his life fighting against.
And this is where it just gets completely nuts. He gets kicked out of the Communist Party, so he starts his own fascist party. Then he's actively recruiting Frenchmen to go fight for Hitler. And he doesn't just talk the talk. He puts on a German uniform and fights on the Eastern Front, even earning an Iron Cross from the Nazis. Think about that whiplash, from Lenin to Hitler, in just a handful of years.
And look, Doriot wasn't some lone wolf. This was a pattern. You had guys like Pierre Laval, a socialist prime minister, who literally signed an anti-Nazi pact with the Soviets in 1935. A few years later, he's a key player in the pro-Nazi Vichy government. Or Marshal Pétain, the Lion of Verdun, the biggest hero of World War I, who becomes an authoritarian head of state.
And here's the kicker. This wasn't a government installed by German tanks and soldiers. This was a completely self-inflicted wound. The French National Assembly, their own elected government, met in the town of Vichy, miles away from the nearest German soldier, and they voted their own democracy out of existence.
Just look at these numbers. This wasn't a squeaker. It wasn't even close. An overwhelming 85% of their own elected representatives voted to just hand over absolute power to one man. They willingly tore down their own republic. This is that political collapse Shirer was talking about.
And the changes were immediate, and they went right to the heart of what it meant to be French. The famous revolutionary motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, gone, officially forbidden. And in its place, this new conservative slogan, work, family, fatherland. It really did look like the French spirit had just snapped.
So, seems like an open and shut case, right? A nation so consumed by its own political fights that it just gave up. And if that were the whole story, we could end right here. But it isn't. Not even close. Because if France didn't fight, then how on earth do we explain the numbers from the actual battlefield?
Okay, so now let's get to the part that seems to contradict everything we just saw. Because the hard data, coming from the German military itself, it paints a very, very different picture. One of intense, brutal, and incredibly costly fighting.
Well, let's just put two massive campaigns side by side. On the left, you have the 35-day campaign in France. On the right, the first 19 days of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union a year later. Well, in France, the German army took about 156,000 casualties. Against the Red Army in that opening phase, 77,000. Yeah, more than double the losses in France.
Now this is the part that just blows my mind. Let's break those numbers down by the day. What's often called the Triumphal March through France cost the German army an average of 4,400 soldiers killed or wounded every single day. And incredibly, that is the exact same daily loss rate as the opening of the brutal War of Annihilation on the Eastern Front. The exact same.
And if you think that's staggering, wait till you see what happened in the air. To attack France, Germany put together the single largest air fleet of the entire war. We're talking over 3,600 combat aircraft. And they paid a huge price for it, losing almost twice as many planes for good as they did in the first few weeks against the massive Soviet Air Force.
Yeah, that number deserves its own moment. 971. In just over a month, the French and their allies completely destroyed nearly 1,000 of the Luftwaffe's very best combat planes. That is not the scorecard of an army that just rolled over and gave up.
So, what are we supposed to make of this? On the one hand, you have a political system that just commits suicide in public, and on the other, you have a military that's inflicting these staggering, almost record-setting losses on the enemy. How do you square that circle? How can both of these things possibly be true?
And the answer, really, is that we've been looking at two different collapses happening at the same time. The fall of France wasn't a simple military walkover. It was this unique kind of catastrophe, a complete and total failure of political will at the very top, while at the very same time, soldiers, pilots, and officers on the front lines were fighting a desperate, surprisingly effective, and incredibly bloody battle against the most powerful army on the planet.
You know, maybe the best final word on this whole tragedy comes from Winston Churchill. Looking back, he pointed out this profound irony, that the Soviets were just watching as the Second Front in the West was destroyed, the very same Second Front that they would soon be desperately begging for. The complex, tragic fall of France in 1940 wasn't just an ending, it was an event that would reshape the entire course of the rest of the war.